Hi guys, it's Emma AITA, your favorite AI slop tuber. Before we jump into today's video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks so much for your support. Now, let's get right into the video. AITA for refusing to raise my children. According to my religious parents' strict beliefs, I'm 34 years old and have always had a complicated relationship with my parents because of religion. I was raised in an extremely strict religious household. My parents are devout members of a very conservative church that controls many aspects of daily life. Growing up, I was homeschooled in a curriculum designed to reinforce the church's teachings, and anything outside the faith was considered dangerous or evil. Music, movies, books, anything secular was forbidden. Even the simplest choices like clothing and hairstyles were strictly regulated. My parents were very clear that the church's doctrine was the absolute truth, and that we were expected to live by it without question. Any doubts or rebellion were met with punishment, shaming, or isolation. For a long time, I accepted this as normal because it was all I knew. I was close to my family in some ways, but felt emotionally stifled and scared a lot of the time. I was afraid of disappointing them or God, and I lived with guilt constantly. When I was a teenager, I started secretly exploring other ideas and learning about the world outside the church's bubble. Eventually, I left home when I was 18, went to college, and slowly began building my own identity, one that did not revolve around the church's rules. When I met my husband, David, things got more complicated. He grew up in a secular family and was supportive of my journey away from religion. We got married and had 2 kids, a daughter, Clara, who's 7, and a son, Max, who's 4. I was determined to raise them differently. I wanted them to grow up with freedom, curiosity, and the ability to choose their own beliefs. I wanted them to understand kindness, empathy, and respect above all else, rather than fear or strict obedience. My husband shared these values. My parents, however, have been struggling with this since day one. They constantly remind me that we're not raising children, we're raising souls, and that without faith, Clara and Max are lost. They have made it clear they want me to raise the kids with the same strict religious values they raised me with. They send me books, religious materials, and at times guilt trips and ultimatums, often disguised as concern. They worry about what kind of people my children will become without God's guidance. I have tried to explain to them that I respect their faith, but that my children will be allowed to explore different ideas, ask questions, and come to their own conclusions when they're older. I want their upbringing to be based on love, not fear or dogma. I don't want to shield them from religion. I just don't want to force it on them. I'm open to them learning about my parents' beliefs if they ask. But I want it to be a choice, not a mandate. This has created a huge rift between me and my parents. Every time they visit, there are subtle or not so subtle attempts to impose their beliefs on the kids. They insist on praying before meals even when I say no, telling the children that without Jesus they won't be saved, or asking the kids leading questions about sin and salvation that make them uncomfortable. I've seen Clara get confused and worried when Grandma and Grandpa talk about hell or the devil. Last Christmas was particularly difficult. My parents insisted on having a family prayer time in the middle of the gift exchange. They told the kids they needed to thank Jesus for their blessings. Clara, shy and unsure, asked me later why they kept talking about scary things like punishment and sin. Max, who's only 4, began repeating some phrases he overheard: sin, hell, bad people. And it broke my heart to see their innocence overshadowed by these concepts. When I confronted my parents after the holidays, they said I was overreacting and that I was being disrespectful to their faith. They claimed I was raising the kids in darkness and that I was stealing their souls. My husband backed me up and reminded them that this is our family now, and we get to make the rules for our children's upbringing. The conversation ended with them saying they felt unwelcome in our home and that maybe the kids shouldn't spend as much time with them. Since then, visits have been more strained. My parents try to behave, but I can tell it's hard for them to hide their disappointment. When the kids are with them, they still slip in religious talk and try to convince the kids to pray and read the Bible. My daughter has started asking questions that show she's trying to make sense of conflicting messages. Sometimes she asks if she's bad for not believing in God like Grandma and Grandpa do. I reassure her over and over that she's loved no matter what she believes. My parents recently offered to take the kids to church on Sundays without me, claiming it would help them find their way. I said no. They were furious. They accuse me of cutting them out and not trusting them as grandparents. They say I'm selfish and that I don't understand how important faith is. I honestly don't know what to do. I want my children to have a relationship with their grandparents, but I'm worried about the emotional toll their religious pressure is having on Clara and Max. I'm also worried that if I give in, I'll be betraying everything I believe in as a parent. I've talked to some friends and therapists, and the advice is mixed. Some say I'm justified in setting boundaries and protecting my kids. Others say family harmony matters, and maybe I should compromise. I just feel stuck. Recently, the situation escalated. My parents came to visit for Clara's birthday party. I made it clear that I didn't want any religious elements at the party. It was a celebration for her. Balloons, cake, presents, and games. Nothing else. They agreed but brought a surprise guest, the local pastor. They invited him behind my back, saying he wanted to bless the kids. During the party, he suddenly stood up and started praying loudly, asking everyone to join. The kids were confused and some of the adults uncomfortable. I asked him to stop, explaining this wasn't a church event. My parents said I was being rude and disrespectful. The pastor left, but the tension lingered. After the party, my parents confronted me, saying I was turning the kids away from God and causing division. They said if I continued on this path, they might have to limit contact to protect their grandchildren's souls. I feel torn. I don't want to lose my parents, but I won't compromise on how I raise my children. I want to be a good parent, one who lets her kids find their own way instead of forcing them into beliefs that made me miserable. After that birthday incident, the atmosphere between my parents and me worsened. They started sending me messages filled with Bible verses and warnings about the consequences of turning away from God. At first, I tried to engage in calm conversations, hoping to find some middle ground, but every dialogue quickly devolved into arguments. They accused me of being prideful and ungrateful, while I told them I felt controlled and suffocated. One day, I received a text from my mom that said, "We don't want to be the bad guys, but we can't stand by and watch you lead the children to ruin. We want to help guide them to eternal life." I didn't respond. I was too hurt and exhausted. I started to notice subtle changes in Clara's behavior. She was quieter than usual, hesitant to talk about her feelings, and she sometimes asked me if she was a good girl because she didn't believe like Grandma and Grandpa wanted. It broke my heart. I realized that even if my parents weren't blatantly forcing their religion on the kids, their presence and disapproval were making the children anxious. They felt torn between two worlds, their mother's open, secular household and their grandparents' rigid, faith-driven home. David and I talked extensively about what to do next. We considered family counseling, but my parents refused, insisting that the church was the only true counselor. We tried explaining that professional help would be neutral and could help ease tensions, but they wouldn't hear it. To protect the kids, we decided to limit their time at grandparents' house. Visits became supervised and shorter. My parents didn't like it, and the guilt trips intensified. "You're destroying the family," my dad said bluntly during a rare phone call. We never expected to be treated like strangers. It was hard. I felt like the villain in my own family story, the one tearing it all apart. But I was determined not to let my children grow up trapped in the same fear and guilt I endured. I wanted them to have freedom, to choose faith if they wished, but without pressure or shame. Then came Clara's school project. Clara's third-grade teacher assigned a family traditions presentation. Clara wanted to talk about Christmas celebrations and the stories my parents told her about Jesus' birth and the meaning of the holiday. When she shared that at school, some classmates questioned why she talked about God and angels. Clara came home confused, saying, "Mom, why do some kids say we're weird for believing in Jesus?" I sat down with her, explaining that people have many different beliefs and that's okay. I told her that faith is personal and that what matters most is kindness and love. She seemed to understand, but also seemed sad. I worried that the conflicting messages were overwhelming her. Meanwhile, my parents heard about the project from their friends at church. They were thrilled and wanted to come to Clara's class to talk about their faith and share Bible stories with the other kids. I immediately said no. This was not their place, nor was it something I wanted enforced on my daughter's school environment. They argued it was their right as her grandparents, but I stood firm. This sparked a new round of arguments. They accused me of silencing them and cutting them out of their grandchildren's lives. I told them that I was protecting my kids' right to experience childhood without religious pressure. My parents began to pull back even more. My mom stopped answering my texts, and my dad's calls became rare and terse. I felt the sting of estrangement deeply but remained resolute. Around this time, I found a support group for parents dealing with similar conflicts. Hearing other stories helped me feel less isolated. I realized many people face battles over faith and family, and there's no perfect solution. It's about finding a balance that works for your family and setting boundaries to protect your children's well-being. One evening, Clara asked me, "Mom, will Grandma and Grandpa still love me if I don't believe like them?" I hugged her tight and said, "They love you very much, but sometimes grown-ups have a hard time when things change. You are perfect just as you are, and you will always have our love." That moment reminded me why I had to keep standing my ground. A few weeks later, my parents sent an email outlining conditions for future visits. They insisted that the children attend church services with them at least once a month, and that prayers be said before meals at our house. I replied calmly, reiterating my position that our home is a safe space for the kids to explore beliefs freely, without pressure or coercion. I offered to allow visits only if these conditions were respected. They haven't responded. The emotional toll has been heavy on everyone. Clara and Max are sometimes caught in the crossfire, unsure of how to balance their love for their grandparents with the confusion over faith expectations. David and I try to shield them as much as possible, but it's difficult. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. Is this boundary setting an act of protection or shutting out family? Could I be more flexible without compromising my values? But then I remember the years I spent living in fear and guilt, the anxiety that accompanied every decision because of religious rules. I don't want that for my kids. My parents, I believe, are acting out of genuine love, but their way of expressing it feels controlling and suffocating. I hope that someday, when the kids are older, they might have a relationship with their grandparents free from judgment and pressure. For now, I continue to stand firm, even if it means strained relationships and heartbreak.